Hey, how are you? We never just talk anymore, you know? I'm gonna be silent for 8 seconds and I want you to fill me in on your life. Ready, go. Wow, those sure are some events. What a nice parasocial relationship we're developing. This video is going to do a few things. I want to talk a little bit about my years as an assistant language teacher teaching English in Japan. I want to give some advice to people who might be starting school soon because that's coming up in a few weeks, I think. And I want to be realistic about what you might experience. However, I don't want to burn any bridges or ruin anyone's fun. And even though I don't live in Japan right now, there are some really strict laws against defamation, so for some of this you might have to read between the lines. But I find that most of these videos come from the perspective of people who find boot delicious or people who got fired and have a chip on their shoulder, and I'm mostly in between. I left my job willingly for another opportunity, and I'm not bitter or angry about the experiences for the most part. So I definitely don't want any potential teachers to think that I'm going to tear down their hopes and dreams, because it can be a good job, but you kind of need to do your part to make it one. See, the golden years of being an ALT or an AET or a teaching assistant or dedicated English assistant of teaching homies is over. That was the 80s and 90s. The post-war miracle is done, and it's done for us too. You're not a king or a queen entering a mysterious place. You're just a person living in Japan. But Japan can still be a wonderful place to work, live, and spend a few years. Like I said, I want to move back when I can. And if this gets enough views, I'm sure it's going to come across another former English teacher. So to that person, I preemptively want to say, I'm sure your experience was different. All experiences are different. Drop me comments and subscribe and then make your own video. Anyway, let's jump in. Editor me, hit the new intro.
助けに来たぜ。ルキア。
It's like saying, I'll take you somewhere with authentic American home cooking and then taking you to Denny's.
Stop talking now? Yeah, you bet.
What do you think of the new intro? Let me know in the comments. I'm really interested. Before I talk about everything, I want to talk about who I am and set the stage on what gives me the goddamn right to make a video like this. Was that too much?
I can never tell.
I arrived in Japan in 2014 and worked at an eikaiwa, it's a language school, for about 8 months, just 4 of my yearly contract. The job was not great, so I bounced. It's not something I'm super proud of in retrospect, but you gotta protect your mental health, and that's what I was doing with that. Maybe I'll tell that story another day. From late 2014 to mid 2020, I worked as an assistant language teacher and then an assistant English teacher when our titles changed in 2018. I worked in elementary school for 2.5 years and then did mostly junior high afterwards. While I worked elementary school, however, I was tasked with jumping around to different schools to kind of solve problems that the dispatch company was having with school districts. If someone the previous year had left in a huff or had been a total dick, they sent me in the next term to try to smooth things over. There is not an official title for that, and I'm not even sure it would be recognized, but I like to think that the dispatch company thought of me as reliable, if only for that. Things mellowed out when I started teaching junior high school, until, the schmovid schmandemic threw a wrench in everyone's everything, and I managed to get a job doing something else. I left the dispatch company, life moves on, da-da-da-da-da. Hopefully this gives me enough cred in your mind that we can continue on with this story. Are we good? I think we're good. So first thing I want to talk about is everything outside of the classroom. And by that, I mean mostly the teacher's room. And I also mean outside the teacher's room. Here's an example layout of an elementary school teacher's office. This isn't an actual one, but it's an example that I've created by teaching at a few different elementary schools. The general dynamic is the same. Elementary schools in Japan are a lot like those in the US, except they go 1 through 6 instead of K through 5. Sometimes there's a kindergarten, but it's a detached building. Each teacher has their homeroom for all base lessons: history, math, science, Japanese, and PE. There's a music teacher they see a few times a week, and an English teacher they also see once a month or once a week, depending on their grade. The teachers will sit together, grouped by year, and this is where the principal sits, looking over his lands like Mufasa. At his side is the vice principal. You want to be on the principal's good side, of course, but if you ever need anything, the vice principal is going to get things done. When you come in the morning, you give everyone a greeting, and then you give this desk a greeting. They will ignore you, most likely, but they will not forget if you do not greet them. Just do it. Do it even if it's troublesome. Do it even if you think it doesn't matter. Do it because you don't want to be the teacher that doesn't do it. There's a lot of that in Japan. Finally, on this side, usually, is the security officer. Usually a 5th or 6th grade teacher. Think of them as the third in charge. They know everything that's going on at the school, and they'll fill the vice principal in on everything. They're the vice principal's Leo McGarry, even if they don't act like it. And really, 99% of the time, they won't act like it. You're probably curious as to why I've mentioned the principal once, but the vice principal a few times. And it's because the principal's position, while very real in terms of power, is a lot more like an ambassador in terms of day-to-day activities. The saying for Japanese schools is that the principal sets the course, but the vice principal steers the ship. Now, this leads me to our first vocabulary word, horenso. Now, for everyone who speaks Japanese, this word also means spinach, but it's actually an abbreviation of hokoku, renraku, and sodan, which means reporting, contacting, and consulting. In other words, everything that is said or done will make its way up to this seat. Let me give you a stupid example. Once, while teaching in my first school, I decided to make hamburgers from scratch because I was homesick, and these chips go great with burgers. They crunch good. I had the hamburger meat and the bread at home, so I bought some chips and a Coke after school. As I was leaving the supermarket, I encountered one of my students from 4th grade. She saw my bag and asked me, "Kore katta no?" And I nodded. "To potato chip?" And I nodded again. I didn't really have the confidence to speak Japanese at the time, but I'd been taking Kumon lessons for a few months, plus my general history with Japanese, so I understood her. All I said was, in English, "I'm hungry," which is vocabulary that we'd learned in class. And she responded with a Japanese phrase that means everything and nothing. He. And that was it. 2 days later, as I was greeting the students in the morning, the principal joined me and asked, "Mr. Upside Up, I hear from the students that you often buy potato chips and cola. I hope you are also buying healthy foods." I want to be clear that this happened once. I did not have a habit of buying chips and cola, and I certainly didn't make a spectacle of it. This just goes to show you that information travels whether you want it to or not. Now, the good news is you're not just a victim of this, you can also get in on it. Let's talk about where you're going to sit. So here is probably about where you'll be sitting. Close to the door, near the nurse, the nutritionist, and the tea lady. If the school has a multi-grade special needs classroom, they're likely sitting here too. During the teachers' meetings, the custodial staff might sit here too. If you're wondering how the information network moves so quickly, you're right in the middle of it. By and large, this group has a lot of free time and does a lot of gossiping. If you speak any kind of Japanese, you can get insight into how the school works. And I know a lot of people don't want to be interested in office politics, but being honest, information is currency in any office. The tea lady can tell you if the superintendent is visiting, maybe you know to wear your nice suit. The nutritionist is in charge of lunch and might sneak you some extra curry or extra pan. The nurse might let you know that the 1st grade is having a flu outbreak, so you can wear a hazmat suit to class. Things like that. And if you want to stay out of office politics, now you know where to not pay attention, I guess.
I was only in there to get directions on how to get away from there.
Before we move on, here's a little bit of real talk for you.
Real talk alert.
Elementary schools have an appointed head of English that usually changes every year. Usually they're voluntold about it at the beginning of the year, and some of those teachers will really resent that position, which might make them inadvertently resent you. But take a second and look at it from their point of view. Over the years of all English teachers, there have been some scandals with weird people who impose themselves on schools, have a bad attitude, and just do much, much worse. Nothing travels the world faster than bad news, so of course the teachers might worry that you're one of those teachers. Now, in addition to their normal job, which is stressful, low-paying, and has long hours, they also have a new X factor. Just a whole ass person. And that's not something they're prepared for. Generally, it's not something they're trained for. So if you're teaching in an elementary school with a new head of English, be kind and be patient and I promise you'll receive kindness and patience in return. It's not personal. If you're lucky, you might get one of the heads of English who are knowledgeable about English. They will sometimes volunteer for multiple years to be head of English, and that'll make it easier on both of you. In terms of planning, usually they speak English, they'll be able to talk with you, and it can lighten your load. But otherwise, it is a bit of a give and take that you have to be aware of. That's something dispatch companies won't tell you. If you're in junior high school or high school, your seating and placement might be different. You might actually sit near whoever the head of English is. And that's because in junior high school and high school, English is a separate subject, which means they all have separate teachers. Chances are they'll speak passable, if not fluent English, and be very friendly to you. Just remember, they're not your friend. At least not at the beginning. Your mileage may vary. I remain friends with one of the heads of English to this day, and I left that job 6 years ago, but that's definitely an exception. Coworkers are coworkers, and especially since Japanese people, by and large, are very standoffish by nature. That's not my opinion. That's several late-night drinking parties with Japanese coworkers and friends where they constantly tell me they wish they could be more outgoing like foreigners, right before they chug another highball and belt out Journey with just mind-boggling accuracy. So, good thing to build up from the beginning is a support group of different people. You have a kind of built-in support group with people that work within your dispatch company, but I also recommend having friends outside, people who aren't related to your job, who are going to be important to know. I've met a lot of people through Meetup, and I think that's a good way to find people. Facebook groups is also surprisingly helpful. You can and should also be aware of local events in your town, since if you're in Japan to experience the culture, those are the best ways to experience the culture, meet some people, and have a lot of fun. Most people who live in Japan are always helpful to newbies, but there are always going to be people who you don't want to be around. Here are some red flags to be aware of. 1. Anyone who looks down on you for teaching English, especially in your first few years of being in Japan. 2. Anyone who offers to introduce you to members of the opposite sex on your first time meeting them. 3. Non-Japanese people who think they know what's best for Japanese people. 4. Men who have lived in Japan for longer than 4 years but don't speak a word of Japanese and aren't interested in learning, especially if they're married and have Japanese wives. I don't know why this is a whole ass genre of men, but it's one that you should really stay away from. And finally, anyone who mentions cocaine. The last one is just a general rule. I mean, stay off drugs, kids. You might be wondering why the last part was longer and this part is so short. It's largely because I want to let you have your own Japan adventure. The biggest advice I could give you, I've given you. Build up a support group. Don't be alone. Don't get in trouble. Remember that everything you do and say could end up back at the school. And have fun. What? He's sponsored already? No. I just want to remind you that I could be. I would put an ad break here. Great place for one. Gardenscapes. World of Tanks. That smelly water thing. I'm on board for whatever. Never too soon to try to cash in on a hobby, baby. We live in a capitalist hellscape. Back to the video. Okay, so this part largely depends on your school and school district. By and large, your dispatch company doesn't care what you're doing as long as the school isn't complaining. From a teacher's perspective, there are horror stories about teachers who are just paid to be human tape recorders, by which I mean your only job is to read from the textbook and pronounce things that the teacher asks you to pronounce. I can attest those stories are true. If you end up as one of those teachers, all you can do is tough it out for the year or decide whether the benefits outweigh the, doing that. Now, you can try to talk with the English teacher about that. Pitch some ideas about things and probably don't get your hopes up. The dispatch company won't do anything to change it. I had a full year where I was required to make full lessons for the first year and the third year, but in the second year, I just read the weekly conversation in between the teacher mocking me in Japanese that he thought I couldn't understand. But that guy was an asshole and an outlier. And those first and third year students were great. So I focused on that as best I could. When you get the opportunity to make lessons, you have a chance to use things they're interested in, to get them interested in the lesson and expand what the students can learn. What you're seeing in this section are examples of PowerPoints that I created for some of my lessons. I had the students read things out loud and then had other students translate them, ensuring students all understood the situations and the vocabulary. Due to increased security risks, you might not be allowed to use PowerPoint, and if that's the case, preparation before class is going to have to be more manual. Write down notes about what you're going to write. Hopefully you can write cleaner on whiteboard than I could. And I know something you're probably worried about is how to get the students engaged. I'll talk about that in a second. I'll be honest, I taught elementary school about 8 years ago, and I don't remember much about it, but what I can tell you is I was the fittest I've ever been in my life. Your job is partially clown now, and I say that with all respect to Fizbo.
I'm the ass-kicking clown that'll twist you like a balloon animal.
You're gonna get active. You're gonna make English into PE sometimes. Head, shoulders, knees, and toes is now your best friend. In the description, I'll leave some links to different websites where you can get ideas for activities and stuff, other than the 2 or 3 activities the dispatch company gives you. Speaking of the description, sorry that it's ugly. I'm trying to broaden my reach, and I've been taking SEO classes. I think keyword stuffing doesn't work anymore, but I don't know what does work, so it's whatever. I have a bunch of ideas and I'm force feeding them to you like a little baby chickadee, but none of this works if you can't get the students to engage with you. And that's where you've been given a gift that you need to learn how to utilize. The gift is lunch and recess. ALTs are encouraged to eat with students in rotation, and while it is absolutely valid to wonder why the hell you're being forced to spend your lunch breaks with a bunch of brats, it is so much easier to look at what it could be, building credibility. Not as an educator, but as a person. They're forced to learn from you. They're not forced to listen to you. You are a stranger in a strange land. Have them teach you something during lunch. There are lots of games that kids play, and by joining in with them, you're also getting them to trust you. Then, when it's time for class, they know you're not just some tall, strange weirdo. You're Mr. Tall, Strange Weirdo, who secretly taught them how to properly throw a punch. The same goes for recess. If you can juggle a soccer ball, you're a god to elementary school boys. Are you a fast runner? You might as well be a Super Saiyan. You can use that free time, and although it may exhaust you, it'll pay off tenfold when you get kids to shut the hell up and listen during your class. If you're in junior high school, you might not be able to have lunch with the students, but you still have recess and you still have some extracurricular stuff. There might be an English club in your school, and if there isn't, pop in on the other clubs. Get the teacher's permission first, of course, but then go in and watch the kendo team, or the art club, or the manga club. They're all amazing. This is when the students have the opportunity to invest themselves in something, and it absolutely shows. Make sure there's always a Japanese teacher in the room for safety and security purposes. Legally, they're CPR trained, but you're likely not. Oh, but if you are, put that on your Japanese resume. Another thing I did was work with the junior high school third-year teacher to give students the opportunity to have conversations with me outside of the classroom. All they needed to do was find me outside of class and have a quick chat with me, and they'd get a sticker. If they got 10 stickers, she'd add a point to one of their tests. So the conversations were free, and the students can express their own opinions away from just textbook English. And you can teach them some school-appropriate slang they might not learn otherwise. For example, I taught my third-year students the phrase chill out, and they used it on an uptight teacher, and it got me in trouble. So you probably shouldn't do that exact thing, but the rest of this is pretty good advice. Teaching English in Japan is really fun, but you probably can't do it forever. The pay is really low, and it's actually dropped since I stopped doing the job, and there is absolutely zero upward momentum. Listen to me. You will not get a promotion from that job. So what can you do? Well, to that, I ask you, why did you actually move to Japan? If it was because you're interested in the culture, then you can focus on learning Japanese and try to become a translator. Or if you're interested in gaming, you can join a codeathon or something like that. Or, you know what? Maybe you do want to teach English in Japan for the rest of your life. And if that's the case, work towards getting your TESOL certification and get a direct hire job. It pays at least double what you're getting at your dispatch job. For 99% of people, dispatch is a temporary job. And you want to leave on good terms just because you never know who you'll run into later on. No matter what you want to do, learn Japanese as quickly as you can. At least get the JLPT N3. N2 is more desired nowadays, but the jump between N3 and N2 is the jump between Shikai and Bankai. That's right. I made a reference that wasn't Dragon Ball. I do that sometimes. For that, I recommend using Japanese whenever you can and look into Kumon. In the future, I'll make a video about how I learned Japanese, but it's a little bit embarrassing, so you might have to wait for that one. Maybe it'll be like a 10,000 subscriber special or something if we see that day. Speaking of which, subscribe if you haven't. What are you doing not subscribing? I'd subscribe to you, is all I'm saying. And speaking of which, we've passed 20 subscribers. We have reached a number of subscribers that I would be uncomfortable to be in the same room with. That is exciting. Oh, I have comments. I'm so happy to interact with you guys. From my depression video, I got comments from both Huiker and Lumiamp about making another vid with some additional ideas. I am absolutely going to do that. I'm really nervous about what the Care Bear stare will do to me, but I'm also really interested in finding out. Darian is here to lie to everyone about Pocari Sweat. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying that calling it sweat is an accurate description in terms of taste. Mr. Samuel Platinum wants to know the name of the guy who told Toriyama to shut up, and honestly, you and me both, dude. Producers in general are absolutely insane. These are the same people who saw that Barbie was a hit and thought it was because of the toys and Oppenheimer. There's no helping them. And finally, Arcana, if you're here for analysis into stuff you already know, you are in the absolute right place. Thank you so much for the sub. I hope you enjoy your stay. And thank you to everyone for spending time with me today. I know that every single video of mine is different, and I know that this is no exception, but with hundreds of new teachers arriving in Japan yearly, I hope that this reaches some of them, and I want to make sure that they enjoy their stay and that they survive the hurdles coming their way. For everyone else, maybe you've always been a little interested in, behind the scenes of teaching English, so hopefully this answers some questions for you. Thank you so much for falling upside up with me. It's the best way to fall down. No outro this time. Just go get a candy bar.